Hi, my name's Mael, and last Mother's Day, I gave my parents a $780,000 seaside mansion. But when I walked through the front door, my father was trembling on his knees, scrubbing the floor like a servant. My mother's eyes were red, like she'd been crying for hours. And my brother, my own brother, stood over them shouting, "If you don't want the nursing home, get out. You've got 24 hours." Then he threw my dad out, onto the porch, said this house belongs to me now, and my sister-in-law, she laughed. That is, until I stepped in. Now, I'm about to tell you what happened after that. The lies, the stolen documents, the silence, the kind of betrayal that doesn't just break families, it exposes them. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this? And where are you right now? Drop it in the comments. Because what I'm about to share might just remind you of someone in your own family, maybe someone you trusted. Let's begin. The drive along Highway 101 had always been my quiet place. Today, though, it felt like a victory march. The Pacific shimmered beside me, waves folding onto the shore like lace, soft, predictable, and calm. I had the windows rolled down, letting the salty air dance through my hair as I gripped the steering wheel, my heart full. I hadn't felt proud of myself in a long time, but today was different. This wasn't just any Sunday, it was Mother's Day. And in the back seat was a box tied with a white ribbon and nestled inside a ceramic mug I'd had custom made. It read, "To the woman who taught me love." But the real gift? The one I couldn't wrap? A $780,000 oceanfront home I had just signed over to my parents, completely paid in full. Cannon Beach had always been my mom's dream spot. She once told me, if I could hear the waves from my bed, I'd sleep better for the rest of my life. This house was my way of saying, I saw you, Mom, even when you didn't see me. For decades, I'd been the quiet one, the easy child. Not a problem, not a prodigy, just present. While my brother Thane soaked up every bit of attention, I learned how to make myself smaller. Until now. I pulled into the gravel driveway, heart pounding. The mansion stood with its cedar siding glowing golden in the morning sun. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the sea behind it. I pictured Mom lighting a candle in the kitchen, Dad reading by the fireplace. I imagined the smell of pancakes and the way she'd hug me, tight, like I still mattered. But the windows were dark, curtains drawn, no welcome mat, no breeze carrying the sound of laughter, just stillness. I grabbed the box, climbed the steps, and paused at the front door. It was cracked open. Inside, it was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. My shoes tapped softly on the hardwood as I moved down the hallway. The living room came into view, and everything I'd imagined shattered. My father was on his knees, scrubbing the floor. Not gently, frantically. His shirt was damp with sweat. Over him stood Thane, arms crossed, barking orders like a drill sergeant. Use the bleach, not the soap. You think this is your house now? Scrub harder. My mother stood near the window, holding the ceramic cup in both hands like it might break if she moved. Her eyes were red. Silent tears streaked her cheeks. I froze. "Dad?" I whispered. No one turned. Then Thane's wife, Isola, shifted on the couch, her long legs stretched out, wineglass in hand. It wasn't even noon. She looked up at me with a slow smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she purred, "look who finally showed up." Thane spun around. His face hardened. "You weren't supposed to come today." I blinked. "What? What's going on here?" He stepped forward. "You gave them the house, Mael, so it's ours to manage. If they don't like the rules, they can leave." My voice caught. "Rules?" Isola took a sip. "He means boundaries, darling. Grown-up stuff." I turned to my mom. "Is that true?" She didn't answer right away. Her hands trembled. The cup still clutched tightly. Then, barely audible, she whispered, "He said we could stay, if we behave." I looked at my father. His eyes, once sharp and proud, were hollow. He didn't meet my gaze, just scrubbed harder. Something cracked deep in my chest. Not a sound, not even a breath, but a rupture. My gift, meant to shelter them, had become a tool for control. Thane had twisted it into something grotesque. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. Thane shrugged. "Long enough for you to mind your own damn business." And just like that, the child in me, the one who longed for her brother's approval, for her father's praise, for her mother's arms, went silent. I stepped back. The gift box slipped from my hands, landing on the floor with a dull thud. Nobody moved. Isola smirked again. "Guess we know who the real favorite is now." I turned without another word, walked out the front door, and stepped into the cold coastal air. The breeze stung my face, but I didn't wipe the tears that had begun to fall. I stood on the porch, staring at the ocean, clutching the empty box like it could explain anything. "Maybe love was never meant to prove anything," I whispered. I turned back toward the house, the ocean wind biting at my neck, and that's when I heard it. My father's voice, low and pained, followed by a thud like something, or someone, hitting the floor. I rushed inside, my heart racing. The hallway felt colder now. The light through the windows had shifted, casting harsh angles across the floorboards. In the kitchen, I found him slumped forward against the counter, one hand clutching his chest, the other gripping the edge of the granite as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Dad!" I ran to him, steadying his frame. Mom was crying again, this time with both hands over her face. "He's just tired, Mael. He's been scrubbing for hours. He's fine," she said, her voice thin and stretched. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. Thane stood in the doorway behind me, arms folded like a self-satisfied landlord, not a brother. "You really should have called before showing up. We're trying to keep things orderly here." "Orderly?" I shot back. "You've got Dad on his knees and Mom afraid to breathe. What is this?" He walked closer, a smug grin tugging at his mouth. "Let me help jog your memory." From his jacket, he pulled out a folded paper and waved it in front of me. "You signed this." I didn't move. He set it on the kitchen island and smoothed it out with 2 fingers. I leaned in slowly. At the top, property transfer agreement. My name, my signature, dated 2 months ago. I blinked. "This is the maintenance authorization you sent me. You said it was temporary." He laughed, not kindly. "You really believed that?" Isola, now leaning in the doorway with her ever-present wine glass, smirked. "You're smart, Mael, but not that smart, huh?" I picked up the paper, hands trembling. The ink was familiar. The formatting, yes, it was the same document I'd skimmed over when Thane told me he'd take care of things while I was traveling. He said it was just to allow him to handle a few property tax issues. "You won't have to lift a finger," he'd promised. "Just sign where it says temporary authority." Temporary, my ass. The signature was mine, but the wording had changed. Or maybe I hadn't looked closely enough. The date had clearly been tampered with, retyped in a different font. My stomach dropped. I looked over at my parents. My mother's eyes darted between me and Thane, like she was silently pleading with both of us not to erupt. Dad sat down heavily on one of the chairs, breathing shallow. "He said it's legal," he mumbled. "There's nothing we can do." I stepped back, needing air, needing space to think, but the house, my gift, now felt like a trap. The same walls I thought would protect them were being used to cage them in. Thane leaned on the island, savoring the moment. "Look, Mael, you've always been the idealist, thought money could fix everything. But that's not how real life works. You gave us this house, and now we're doing what's best." "Best for who?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. He smiled wider. For the family. That word felt dirty coming out of his mouth. I said nothing, just nodded slowly, then lifted my phone, angled it discreetly, and snapped a quick photo of the document. He didn't notice. He was too busy basking in his own reflection in the glass cabinet door behind me. "I'm not going to argue," I said calmly, "but this isn't over." Dad looked up, his lips parting as if to say something, but no words came. Just a look, one that said he'd already given up. I went to the sink, needing something to do with my hands. There, on the counter, sat the Mother's Day mug. A fine crack ran down the side, hairline almost invisible. My breath caught. Somehow it had broken, maybe when Mom flinched earlier, maybe from being dropped. Either way, it was no longer whole. I ran water into it, then stopped and set it gently in the sink. The crack would widen over time, just like this mess. There was a ringing in my ears, not a real sound, just the weight of betrayal humming beneath my skin. My brain flipped backward, months ago, late January. I'd been in Dallas for a conference. Thane had called, casual as ever. "Hey sis, I looked into that tax thing for the house. It's a mess, but I got it. I'll email you a form to sign. Just gives me temp access. Saves you a headache." I'd been half asleep, eating cold fries in a hotel room. Of course I signed it. Of course I trusted him. He was my brother. Or so I thought. I blinked back to the present, grounding myself. The late afternoon light had begun to fade. Outside, the sea rolled on, unaffected by any of this. I heard the back door slam. Thane had stepped out, probably to take one of his never-ending calls. Good. I turned back to my parents. "Pack your things," I said, soft but clear. "I'll find another place if I have to. This isn't over." Dad didn't answer. Mom reached for my hand. "Don't fight him, honey," she whispered. "He always wins." I looked at her, really looked. Her face had aged 10 years since I saw her last. Her voice wasn't scared, it was resigned, like she'd accepted this was just how things were now. I nodded, but not in agreement. "Not this time," I whispered. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed long after the waves outside faded into the background, my thoughts louder than the tide. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's slumped shoulders and the way my mother clutched her hands like they were trying to hold back time. By 5:30, I gave up trying. I dressed quietly, grabbed my bag, and slipped out of the house before the sun rose. The hallway creaked under my steps, same spot where Dad had been forced to his knees. That sound would stay with me. I didn't even look at the ocean this time. I got in my car and drove, heading inland toward Portland. My breath fogged up the windshield as I replayed my brother's voice from the day before. "You gave us this house." As if I'd gift-wrapped our parents' dignity and handed it to him with a bow. 2 hours and change later, I pulled into a parking garage near Burnside. The streets of downtown Portland were just waking up. Coffee shops unlocking, joggers already on their second mile. My hands were cold as I stepped into the building that housed Holt & Waters, a boutique law firm run by an old college friend I hadn't seen in years. Cameron Holt looked older, more serious than the guy I used to study contracts with at Oregon State. But his eyes were still sharp, and he recognized me instantly. "Mael," he said, rising from behind his desk. "Wow, it's been forever." "Too long," I said, forcing a small smile. "I wish this was a social visit." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Start at the beginning." I pulled out my phone and showed him the photo I'd taken of the transfer document. He studied it in silence, brow furrowing. "This isn't a standard deed," he said finally. "This clause here, permanent custodial reassignment. That's not language you use in a gift deed. And see this?" He zoomed in. The witness signature was photocopied, not original ink. My throat tightened. So it's fraud, he said. Looks like a forged ownership reassignment. My hands clenched into fists on my lap. Can I fight this? Yes, but it won't be easy. Your brother didn't just manipulate you. He manipulated the legal process, used the trust you gave him to reroute the system in his favor. I swallowed the burn in my throat. He's got our parents terrified. They're scared to even speak up. Cameron nodded, his tone shifting into attorney mode. Then we make a case for coercion, elder abuse. But we need documentation, emails, texts, witness statements, anything showing he knew they were vulnerable. The words elder abuse hit me like cold water. It made everything uglier and more real. I'll get whatever I can, I said. This isn't about the house anymore. He leaned forward, voice low. Then stay calm, build your case, and be smart. Guys like your brother, they always overplay their hand. We shook hands, and I promised to keep him updated. The way out, I paused in the lobby and pulled out my phone, typing his last sentence into a note. They always overplay their hand. By the time I reached Cannon Beach again, the sky had dimmed into a steely gray. The house loomed ahead, its grand facade now a mask over everything it had become. Inside, things were eerily quiet. Isola's heels clicked upstairs somewhere, but I moved quickly past the kitchen into the den. My father's old filing box sat near the bookcase. I dropped to my knees and opened it. Most of it was familiar. Utility bills, tax receipts, scribbled notes in his careful handwriting. But then, tucked near the back, I found it. A folder marked simply Bank. Inside were statements from 5 years ago, a joint account. Thane's name listed beside theirs. Dozens of withdrawals, large ones, unexplained. My breath caught. I flipped through the statements faster, finding loan documents I didn't recognize. Debt taken in my father's name, but signed by someone else. My hands shook as I realized the full weight of it. He's been draining them for years, I whispered. He used their love to fund his greed. I felt a shift inside me, something cold, something steady. I took photos of everything, labeling them clearly in a private folder on my phone. This wasn't just betrayal, it was theft, abuse, manipulation built on years of quiet control. That afternoon, I walked to the mailbox at the edge of the driveway. Among bills and junk, one envelope stood out, thin, white, from the county assessor's office. Addressed to me. I tore it open. Notification of title reassignment. Dated 2 weeks ago. A copy of the updated deed enclosed. He'd hidden it, deliberately. He knew exactly what he was doing. I folded the letter and slipped it into my coat pocket, jaw tight. As I walked back to the house, the sea roared behind me. I turned and stared at it for a long moment. It looked calm, serene, beautiful even. But I knew better now. The sea hides its violence under a blanket of rhythm. Back inside, I sat at the dining table and opened a fresh notebook. I started writing everything, dates, conversations, what I'd signed, what I hadn't, every discrepancy, every whisper. If Thane had a paper trail of lies, I'd make my own. One of truth. I didn't cry, not once. I didn't pace the room or scream into the wind. I just kept writing. That night, as the house settled into uneasy quiet again, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A voice memo. I hit play. Thane's voice came through, calm and cold. "Don't dig too deep, sis. You might find what you can't handle." I froze, played it again and again. Third time, I heard it. He wasn't talking to me. I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, still clutching my phone, my breath shallow. That voice memo hadn't been meant for me. The way Thane had said it, low, clipped, was how he spoke when he thought he was in control. But it wasn't just what he said, It was what followed. My mother's voice, trembling, pleading, like she knew she was part of something she couldn't escape. The sun had barely begun to dip behind the gray horizon when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Then a knock on the door. Not hard, not soft. Just enough to say, "You're expected." "Dinner's at 6, Isola's voice sang from the other side. "Family meeting. Don't be late, sweetheart." Sweetheart. The way she said it made my stomach turn. I changed into something warmer. The ocean air had cooled, and the wind seeped through every old window of the house like a warning. As I walked down the hall, I passed the living room. My father was in his recliner, still, distant. My mother sat near him, hands folded in her lap like she was back in church, praying the sermon would end soon. The dining room had been dressed up like a scene out of a glossy magazine. Candles, wine glasses, linen napkins. Isola played hostess, pouring red wine like we were celebrating something. "Where's the confetti?" I muttered, mostly to myself. Thane stood at the head of the long oak table, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a thin white envelope. He looked like a man with a plan, a man who wanted you to know he was 3 steps ahead. "Let's begin," he said, with that smug calm that made me wish I'd never trusted him with a single thing in my life. My parents sat side by side at the far end, like guests in a home they'd lived in their whole lives. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother tried, but hers darted away too quickly. Thane cleared his throat. "As of today, the deed has officially been refiled. The property is now under Isola's and my name. Permanently. Legally." He paused, letting it land. But he held up the envelope, waving it like a magician about to pull off a trick. "Out of respect for our parents, we're offering them the chance to remain here. Rent-free, of course." My heart pounded. He went on. "All we ask is they agree to a few simple house rules. Nothing extreme, just clarity." "House rules?" I said, my voice steady but sharp. "This isn't summer camp, Thane. They're not tenants. They're your parents." He smiled, and I saw something cold flicker behind his eyes. "And I'm the one keeping them off the streets. Or would you rather they be somewhere else, Maëlle?" "Don't argue," my mother whispered, not even looking up. "Please." Isola gave a soft chuckle, sipping her wine. "Your sister always means well. That's her problem, isn't it?" My fists clenched under the table. But I remembered Cameron's advice. Don't explode. Observe, collect, protect. Thane slid the envelope across the table toward my father. "Inside, you'll find an agreement to be signed. Standard caretaker clause. Nothing unusual. Just formalities." I reached for it before my father could. I pulled out the document and scanned it. I didn't need a law degree to see what it was. "Tenants at will?" I said aloud, looking straight at him. "You're trying to legally strip your own parents of their rights to this house." My father looked like he'd been slapped. His hand moved slowly toward the pen near the document. "No," I said quietly, placing my hand over his. "Not this time." The tension crackled. Thane's voice dropped into something colder. "You think you can stop this?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I already did." I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. The room went silent. Thane's voice came through, grainy but clear. "Hide that letter before she sees it. If Mel learns, she'll ruin everything." There was a pause, then our mother's voice, soft and terrified. "Please don't drag her into this." No one moved. Isola's wine glass tilted slightly in her hand. My mother pressed her hands over her mouth. I let it play in full. Then silence again. My eyes went to the middle of the table. The ceramic cup, the one I gave Mom this morning, was still there, chipped from earlier. A drop of red wine had spilled inside it. It looked like blood. I turned to Thane. "You can't rewrite what this house was meant for, but you just proved who you really are." He didn't speak. His jaw tightened. My mother's eyes finally lifted, but instead of apology, all I saw was shame. And something deeper, something like surrender. I had waited my whole life for her to stand up for me, but tonight, I realized I had to be the one standing. I pushed the envelope back across the table. If you think you can bully them into signing that, you've already lost. Thane leaned forward, his voice low, dripping venom. You just made your last mistake. His words echoed long after he left the room. You just made your last mistake. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. One I intended to rewrite. I left before dawn. The sky was still ink dark, the world cold and silent. My eyes burned, not from crying, but from everything I refused to let fall apart. I drove with no music, no sound, except the ocean receding behind me and the hum of the tires over wet asphalt. By the time I reached Portland, the city was just waking up. I parked outside Cameron's office, the same coffee cup still sitting on the dashboard from yesterday. It had gone cold hours ago, like everything else that used to feel warm. He looked up as I walked in. I figured you'd come back, he said, voice low, steady. I sat down and slid my phone across the desk, screen lit with the recording. You need to hear this, I said. He listened without interrupting, not once. When the audio ended, he leaned back, eyes narrowing. And this is the contract? I handed it over. He flipped through the pages carefully, then set it down with deliberate calm. This isn't just fraud anymore, he said quietly. This is elder coercion. If we can prove intent, your brother's looking at felony charges. The words hung in the air, like thunder waiting to break. I didn't flinch. So how do we prove intent? He sighed, rubbing his chin. You'll need evidence that shows your parents were under pressure. Messages, witnesses, anything linking his manipulation to their compliance. But I'll be honest, it's uphill. The law's slow when blood's involved. Family cases blur motives. Judges like to believe everyone meant well. I'm not doing this for revenge, I said softly. I'm doing this because they've forgotten what love looks like. Cameron's expression softened, but his tone stayed practical. Then we start small. I'll draft a revocation notice. It'll freeze the property transfer while an investigation begins. But, he paused. I knew that kind of pause, the one that carried bad news. You'll need one of your parents to sign it. I felt my chest tighten. My father's health, my mother's fear. I could already see the hesitation, the pleading, the quiet surrender that had become their language. What if they don't? I asked. He met my eyes. Then you stand alone, Mel. But sometimes that's the only way to stand. By afternoon, I was back at the house. The drive felt longer this time, every mile heavier than the last. The mansion loomed against the gray sky, proud and empty at the same time. Inside, my mother sat by the window overlooking the sea. The light from outside caught the silver in her hair, turning it almost white. Mom, I said, walking closer, why didn't you tell me? She didn't turn at first. Her voice was faint, like she was afraid the walls would hear her. Because he promised to keep us safe. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would stop. Something inside me cracked. Not anger, not pity, but understanding. The kind that hurts worse because it makes sense. I knelt beside her chair and took her hand. Your silence gave him permission, Mom. She looked at me then, her eyes glistening but clear. I know. For a long moment, we just sat there, the waves filling the silence. Then she squeezed my hand. Take it back, Mel. Take everything back. It was the first time she'd given me permission to fight. I nodded, not as her daughter, but as someone ready to end this. As dusk settled, I stepped out onto the balcony. The sea below was restless, the wind sharp. The same ocean that once calmed me now seemed to roar in agreement. "I'm done cleaning up his mess," I whispered. Somewhere inside, a shift happened. A quiet clarity that no threat could shake. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about restoration, about reclaiming what had been twisted. The sky darkened, and I went inside just as headlights swept across the driveway. A car door slammed. Moments later, a knock echoed through the house. I opened the door to a courier holding a large envelope. "Delivery for Mael Ria," he said. I signed and shut the door before he even turned away. My hands shook slightly as I tore it open. Inside was a letter, thick paper, embossed header. It was from Thane's attorney, a cease and desist, accusing me of harassment, defamation, and interfering with family business. It warned of legal action if I didn't cease disruptive behavior immediately. I read it twice, then a third time, and then I smiled. A small, quiet smile, the kind that comes when you know someone's running scared. If he wanted to fight on paper, I'd fight with the truth he tried to bury. 2 days later, I stood in the Clatsop County Courthouse, the petition trembling slightly in my hand. My signature was already on it. Now, all that remained was the stamp, the one thing that would make this war official. The clerk didn't say much. She just glanced at the form, raised an eyebrow as she read the parties involved, and then lowered her hand onto the desk. The sound of the stamp hitting paper echoed louder than it should have in that marble lobby. A dull thud that vibrated right through my chest. Behind me, the door swung open. Cameron stepped in, buttoning his coat. "So," he said, walking up beside me, "you're really doing this." "I already did." He nodded once. "He's going to hit back fast and hard." "I'm counting on it." By mid-afternoon, the first blow landed, but not on me. Back at the house, a sheriff's deputy stepped out of a county SUV, envelope in hand. I was in the living room, reviewing the copy of our filing when I heard the knock. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Isola did. I could hear her laugh from where I stood, high-pitched, fake, like it was all a misunderstanding. "Official business?" she chirped. The deputy handed the envelope over without a word. Moments later, Thane's voice boomed from the hallway. Papers rustled, shoes stomped. Then he stormed into the living room, red-faced, shaking the envelope. "You think you can humiliate me in my own home?" I met his glare with a level stare. "You've already done that to yourself." For once, he didn't know what to say. Behind him, our father sat stiff in his recliner, his hands folded tightly in his lap. My mother stood just behind the doorframe. She didn't speak, but her eyes, still tired, still soft, held something new. A spark, a trace of pride. Thane didn't throw the papers. He didn't yell again. He just turned and walked out, the echo of his footsteps trailing off through the hallway. That night, I was alone in the guest room, staring at my phone screen when it lit up. His name flashed across it. I let it ring twice before answering. His tone had changed. "Mel, come on. You don't want this to get ugly. Think about Mom and Dad. This doesn't have to be public. We can fix this. Quietly." Quietly. That word. Again. I let him talk. Let him spin the same web I'd fallen into for years. Then I said, "You've always won that way. Quietly. Not anymore." And I hung up. It only took 15 minutes for the next hit to arrive. An email. Anonymous sender, but I knew who it was from the second I opened the attachment. A doctored bank statement, full of highlighted entries that made it look like I'd been siphoning money from my parents' retirement account. Sloppy, rushed, obvious to anyone who actually worked in finance. But I wasn't angry. Not this time. I was documenting. I saved the file, backed it up in 3 places, and forwarded it to Cameron. "Here it comes," I wrote. "Round 2. In the kitchen, the light above the sink buzzed softly. I walked over to refill my glass and spotted it. The cup. That old, cracked Mother's Day cup, now broken clean in half. The one I hadn't thrown away. My mother's voice drifted behind me. "It's just a cup." I turned. She stood in her robe, arms crossed, watching me with a tired smile. "No," I said, picking it up gently. "It's proof that something beautiful can't survive lies." I didn't toss it in the trash. Instead, I wrapped both pieces in paper towel, gently folded them into a shoebox, and wrote one word on the lid: evidence. Later that evening, I took my laptop to the small cafe down the road. It was nearly empty, except for an old man reading the newspaper and the college kid behind the counter who didn't look up once. I opened my documents. Every screenshot, every scan, every message, dates, times, backups, duplicates. My war wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was lined up, click by click, truth by truth. At 9:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. Cameron. "You need to see this," he said. He sent over a PDF. The title read, "Deed Transfer, Property, Warteen 08, Cannon Beach." I opened it slowly, already expecting some fresh attempt at forgery, but my eyes landed at the bottom of the page and stopped. Beside my forged signature was another name. Not Thane's, not Isola's. It was my mother's. Her handwriting was unmistakable. I stared at it until the letters blurred, until the room felt cold. My mother hadn't just been silent, she'd been part of it. The thought echoed in my head all night. By morning, I hadn't slept. The house was unusually still, the kind of quiet that presses down on you until breathing feels like guilt. The sound of waves outside used to comfort me. Now, it just reminded me how easily things break apart and reform, unrecognizable. When I walked into the kitchen, she was already there, sitting at the table in her robe, hands folded around a mug she wasn't drinking from. The ocean light came in through the glass doors, pale and cold. She didn't look up when she said, almost whispering, "You saw my name, didn't you?" I stopped across from her, my throat too tight to answer. I just nodded. Her fingers trembled as she folded a napkin over and over. "He said it was just a formality," she murmured, "that it would protect the house, in case something ever happened to you." I pulled out the chair slowly, sat down. "You believed him?" She looked up then. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying, but there was a flicker of something else. Shame. "I wanted to," she said. "He told us you were planning to sell it, that you didn't care about this place anymore. He said if we didn't sign, we'd lose everything." Her words sliced through me, sharper than any betrayal Thane could deliver. "So, you thought I'd take their house and throw you out?" I said quietly. "Is that really who you think I am?" She started to cry, soft at first, then harder. "He said you'd cut us off if you found out we took money for repairs. He said you'd be angry, ashamed of us." I leaned back in the chair, my hands gripping the edge of the table. I wanted to shout, to shake her, to make her see how absurd it sounded. But when I looked at her, this woman who had spent her whole life smoothing over conflict, making excuses for everyone but herself, I couldn't. It wasn't stupidity. It was fear. Thane had used her weakness like a key. Before I could speak again, there was a sound, a small gasp, followed by a low groan. My father, sitting in the adjoining room, slumped forward. His hand clutched his chest. "Dad!" I bolted toward him, catching his shoulder before he slid from the chair. My mother screamed his name, rushing over as I grabbed the phone. My fingers barely hit the numbers, my voice breaking as I spoke to the dispatcher. "He's not breathing right. Send an ambulance to Ocean Crest Drive, the Rhea residence. Please, hurry." The next minutes blurred into motion, sirens, paramedics, the slam of the stretcher against the front door, my mother sobbing behind them. At the hospital, everything slowed again. The doctor's voice was calm but distant. "A mild heart attack. He's stable now, but he needs rest and no stress. Emotional strain is a serious factor. I stood in the hallway outside the ICU window, staring through the glass at my father hooked to the monitors. The rhythmic beeping was steady, almost cruel in its normalcy. Behind me, my mother whispered, "This is my fault." I turned. She looked small, like a child caught in a lie too big to fix. "No," I said, my voice steady now, low. "This is what happens when we let fear become loyalty." She flinched at the words but didn't argue. We sat for a long time in the waiting area. The vending machine hummed, someone's shoes squeaked down the hall, and somewhere a nurse laughed softly. Life went on, as it always does, even when yours feels like it's splitting in half. When my mother finally spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "He's always been so convincing. Ever since you were little, Thane could make me believe anything. He had that charm. I thought I was protecting peace." I closed my eyes, exhausted. Peace isn't silence, Mom. It's truth. Later, while she stayed by my father's side, I walked to the hospital gift shop just to breathe. It was small, sterile, full of things meant to comfort people who didn't know how. There, near the register, a small basket caught my eye. Inside, glass pieces gleamed under the light, blue, green, white. A label read, "Sea glass, washed, not broken." I picked one up, a smooth blue shard, cold in my palm. It reminded me of home, of the way the sea punishes and polishes everything it touches. I bought it, slipped it into my coat pocket. When I returned to the waiting room, the nurse told me visiting hours were ending. My mother was asleep by my father's bed, her hand resting lightly on his arm. For the first time in years, she looked peaceful. I leaned against the doorway, watching them. My anger was still there, deep and quiet, but it had changed shape. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding what fear had destroyed. By the time I drove back toward the coast, the sky had darkened into a bruised purple. Fog rolled in thick, swallowing the road ahead. The headlights of cars stretched like ghosts through the mist. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I almost ignored it until I saw the image, a photo of our house, the mansion, taken from outside through the trees. Underneath it, a single line of text, "You should have stayed quiet." I pulled over, heart hammering. The sea crashed somewhere below the cliffs, invisible in the dark. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen, my reflection faint against the glass. Then I whispered, "No, not anymore." The fog was so thick that night, I could barely see the road ahead, but somehow, for the first time in a long while, I felt clear. Tired, shaken, but clear. 2 mornings later, I stood on the courthouse steps, holding my breath as I stared up at its stone facade. Gray marble, cold and indifferent, stretched high above me. Inside those walls, truth would either crack open or disappear under more silence. I stepped through the metal detectors alone. No fanfare. Just me and a file folder I had memorized front to back. Cameron met me at the end of the hallway, already in his navy suit, tie crooked like always. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded once. "As I'll ever be." He handed me a copy of our petition, crisp and stamped. "Truth doesn't need volume, just timing." Inside the courtroom, Thane and Isola sat like they were at a gala. She had on a designer coat that still had the store tag tucked under the hem. Thane leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, grinning like a man who'd already won. When he saw me enter, he tilted his head and mouthed something I didn't care enough to decipher. The judge entered. We stood, swore in, sat down. Everything moved fast, like gears catching in a machine that had been rusted too long. Cameron handled the intro, the petition, the recording, the bank statements. I watched Thane squirm as the audio played aloud, his voice clear and cocky. "Hide that letter before she sees it. If Mel learns, she'll ruin everything." Then came the photo comparisons, signatures, property deeds, email printouts. But what changed everything was a single folded paper. Cameron slid forward, sealed in a protective sleeve. My mother's handwriting, a short, pained confession. That she had signed documents under Thane's direction. That she didn't understand what they were, only that he told her it would protect the house. Her words weren't dramatic, just honest. Tired. A low gasp passed through the courtroom. Even the judge's brow lifted. Thane stood abruptly, his voice rising. "This is ridiculous. She's always been jealous of me, ever since we were kids." The judge raised a hand, unimpressed. "Sit down, Mr. Rhea." Thane's lawyer tried to argue the recording was inadmissible. Cameron stood, voice steady. "Oregon law allows recordings without consent when capturing evidence of abuse, fraud, or coercion. We're well within bounds." The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. Silence. Then slowly, he nodded. "Petition for injunction granted. Asset freeze effective immediately pending full investigation." Thane looked like he'd been slapped. When the session adjourned, I walked out calmly. My hands didn't shake, my voice hadn't cracked. Outside, by the old stone fountain, I reached into my bag. In one palm, I held the cracked piece of the old Mother's Day cup. In the other, the sea glass I picked up at the hospital. One shattered by betrayal. One transformed by force. I wasn't the cup anymore. I was the glass. That evening, I returned to the house. My father was resting, pale but stable. My mother had made dinner, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, the kind of meal she used to make when we were kids, and she wanted everything to feel okay. Her hands still trembled as she set the plates, but her smile was real, small, but real. We had just started to eat when the front door opened. Thane walked in like he still owned the place. Isola behind him, sunglasses on indoors. Nobody said anything. The sound of their shoes on the hardwood floor was louder than anything. He stood at the table, arms folded. "You think you've won?" I didn't look up from my fork. "No," I said. "I think I ended the game." I reached into my bag again and slid a sealed envelope across the table. He opened it. The color drained from his face. The court order. His access to family assets, frozen. His influence, suspended. Isola's smile faltered. For the first time, she didn't say anything. Thane's jaw clenched. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just stood there, holding the paper like it burned. My mother glanced at me, her eyes wide with something that looked like hope. He left without a word. Isola followed. After the door closed, my mother finally exhaled. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was freeing. I helped her clear the table. No one said much. Later, sitting at the kitchen counter, she touched my hand gently. "Do you think he'll ever forgive us?" I looked at her, not with anger, but truth. I don't need forgiveness from people who mistake kindness for weakness. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, one photo, Thane's car, parked outside my house, and a single message. "You think the court can save you?" I stared at the screen, pulse steady. The wind outside roared against the windows. This wasn't over, not yet, but it quieted. A week passed like exhale after a scream. The house stood still, blanketed by ocean fog and the hush that only follows wreckage. No banging doors, no raised voices. Just the sound of gulls overhead and the occasional creak of floorboards that now belonged to no one but us. I woke up early. The kind of early that didn't require an alarm, just the body knowing it needed stillness. I stood at the same window where I once watched my father mop the entryway, back bent, shoulders tired. The light coming through now felt different, not bright, but gentle, almost forgiving. On the kitchen counter sat the final envelope from the court. It confirmed what Cameron had told me the day before. The injunction was upheld. The house was returned to my name. My parents were reinstated as co-beneficiaries. It was done. Thane and Isola had disappeared, not just physically. Their social media accounts vanished. Mutual friends fell silent. Word spread quietly across town. He'd pushed too far. People didn't confront him, they just stopped opening their doors. Shame doesn't need an audience when silence does the job better. I found my parents on the porch, wrapped in throw blankets, watching the gulls drift across the water. My dad looked thin, but rested. My mom hadn't stopped apologizing since the hearing. Every time I walked into the room, her eyes filled with guilt, and she'd start again. "Stop saying sorry, Mom," I said, sitting beside her. "You did what you thought love meant." I glanced out toward the tide. Now we get to redefine it. She reached over, her fingers curling gently over mine. No words, just a squeeze. Later that afternoon, after lunch and a soft nap I hadn't planned on taking, I walked down to the beach with two things in my coat pocket: a shard from the old Mother's Day mug and the piece of sea glass I found at the hospital gift shop. The tide was rolling out, leaving little trails of foam like fading fingerprints. I walked until the sand grew cool beneath my feet, and the wind stung my cheeks just enough to feel awake. Kneeling near the shoreline, I dug a shallow patch in the wet sand and placed both items side by side. The cup had been broken by betrayal, the glass reshaped by time and pressure. I didn't need to keep either anymore. The next wave swept them under. When I got back, I found a note on my bed, written in my mother's soft cursive on old stationery. "I stayed silent because I thought peace was the same as love. You taught me that peace means truth, even when it hurts." I didn't cry right away. I folded the paper carefully, walked to the living room, and slid it into the old family photo album right next to a picture of my father holding me as a baby. That evening, I walked the path along the cliffs. The sun dipped low, casting everything in gold. Below, the waves churned like they always had. But tonight, it didn't sound like rage. It sounded like applause. Applause not for revenge, but survival. I closed my eyes and whispered to the sea. I gave them a house. They tried to take it, but I built something stronger, a home that can't be stolen. That night, I logged onto my laptop one last time. I wasn't looking for anything, just habit. Then, a new email blinked in. No sender, no subject, just one line. "You were right." I stared at it, half smiling. Maybe it was Thane. Maybe it wasn't. It didn't matter. I closed the laptop, stepped outside, and let the wind carry the rest. I didn't build that house for forgiveness. I built it so no one in my family would ever have to beg for a home again.